everyone, and welcome back to the latest, the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you beyond the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles written by our team this week. My name is Noah Nickel. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Brock Press and host of the latest, and today I'm joined by our managing editor, Holly Morrison. As always, it's great to see you. How are you doing today, Holly?
I'm doing very good. It's a very nice day. How are you doing?
Yeah, it seems like we're fairly consistently out of the depths of winter, so I'm doing better too. I know that this is a tough time of year for everyone though, because we are reaching the end of the semester, and especially with the weather getting nicer, it is tough to stay focused, tough to stay committed, and tough to get everything in on time. So I just want to commend everyone for all the work that they're doing, and just to make sure they're holding on for the last couple weeks of the semester. It's right around the corner. Let's try to finish strong. All of us could use that type of motivation from time to time. And I know something about the winter semester, just kind of knowing that summer is right around the corner, can make it all that much harder to finish up strong. But let's just finish strong. And, with that little tangent, let's get into this week's articles.
Okay, so the first selection of articles we're going to be talking about pretty much just the entire sports section. It's been quite a season for just about every Brock sports team. We've had great results all season, but especially heading into the postseason and heading into the playoffs, every team has really just stepped it up a notch, and the games have been super exciting. And our wonderful sports and wellness editors, Jonah, Liam, and Morgan, have been covering the teams and sort of their rises. So we've got in like the three main winter sports that we cover, we've got volleyball, basketball, and hockey. In terms of volleyball, the men's volleyball season wrapped up their season fourth place in the OUA. They didn't end up making it to the OUA final, but they certainly wrapped up their most successful season to date. It's been a heck of a season for them. The women played in the OUA final. They are the OUA champions, so best team in the province, according to the playoffs at least, which also means that they are going to be going to nationals, which is, I think, a very nice thing to see for the women's volleyball team, because if you remember, they were supposed to go to nationals just before the pandemic hit. They actually were in, I think it was Saskatchewan. Don't quote me on that. But they were there ready to compete in nationals when everything started getting shut down. So that was really tough for them. So it's really good to see them getting another crack at it. And this year, being the best team in Ontario. In terms of basketball, the men's team won their opening playoff game over Laurier, and they sort of trounced them a little bit, 82-58. Some really, really good performances by the entire team. The women beat McMaster, a much closer game, a really low-scoring game, 49-45. So they'll be advancing to the semifinals. In terms of hockey, the men are going to be playing the Rams tomorrow in an OUA semifinal, and they beat York 8-2. It was quite a barn burner. I was there for that game. So definitely very well deserved. The women's hockey team, and this is definitely, along with the volleyball team, definitely the biggest story that's coming out of Brock Sports. The women's hockey team are the OUA champions for the first time in program history. They beat Western 3-0 in the semifinal. I was also there for that game. I'd say it's the best game that I've ever seen the women's hockey team play. And then they beat Nipissing 2-1 in the OUA final. So they're now the OUA McCall Cup champions, and they are already in Prince Edward Island, gearing up to make a run at the national title. So a lot of really, really great stuff coming out of Brock Sports. If you can make it to a home game, they are super fun. There won't be any more women's volleyball or women's hockey home games to head to, but the men's teams might have home games, just depending on how things shake out. And the basketball team, men's basketball team and women's basketball team, will likely be at home. So check those out. It's been a banner season for Brock Sports, which is not a sentence that I thought I would get to say while I was here, Brock. Definitely not a school that's known as a big sports school, but definitely making their mark in Ontario.
Yeah, they've seemed to be really on the up and up since I've started here. Don't remember hearing much, although I also didn't work for the newspaper at the time. But every year it seems like they're kind of moving that goalpost further. So thanks for the update, Holly, on the sports front, and thanks for obviously our sports staff for writing all those great recap articles on all the games. You can check all those out at our website, www.brockpress.com. And yeah, congrats to what all the athletes have accomplished thus far, and good luck as they continue, and a lot of them going for gold, which is pretty remarkable. So yeah, way to go. So this week my editorial was all about deepfakes, particularly in relation to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. There was one deepfake released of the Ukrainian president saying that, telling all fighters to put their arms down and to essentially give up. It was fairly easily debunked, this one, but I think it kind of shows that deepfakes could work potentially as a tool, to destabilize and to misinform, especially if they continue to improve in their quality and believability. So I just kind of dove into that and a few other issues about deepfakes as well, and how they're not generally used for the most savory or ethical purposes. And yeah, that's kind of what I talked about. So with that, let's get into discussion. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this, Holly. Yeah, I'm curious if you think that deepfakes could potentially complicate issues of fake news, misinformation in the future.
I mean, yeah. I think one thing that we're definitely seeing, obviously with the situation in Ukraine, but also just like everywhere else, is the idea that you can't really trust video anymore. There was sort of, I guess, this idea for a while that video is inherently trustworthy because it's, provably you can see the things that are happening, whereas, with text and sort of print forms of information, those things can be altered super easily. But now we're sort of seeing that you can't. I guess we sort of saw first that you can't trust videos of things happening because people can mislabel them, people can add things to them super easily. It doesn't take a whole lot of technological skill to alter a video. But now we're also seeing that you can't even trust videos of what appear to be people speaking. And that I think is definitely something to be aware of and something definitely to be incredibly wary of, because if you can't trust a video that you see, on the internet, I think that's just an incredibly strange and scary place to be in. And then there's also the concern that, there's the potential that a deep fake could be so convincing that it could appear on the internet and then it appears on the 6 o'clock news because someone hasn't debunked it yet. I think that's where, for me, it gets a little bit very dystopian, futuristic, just crazy.
Yeah, it's very concerning in a situation like this, right? Where luckily it was not particularly believable, but I mean, it was a dangerous message, right, to anyone if they were to hear that and believe it. A very dangerous message to be sending. So there's clearly risk there, but I think potentially even more risky about deepfakes is more using them as cover, even, which I can see people doing. Trying to muddy the waters when things are released about them that may be true, or things that they did say. If we're not properly reining this issue in, then that becomes an easy cover for them to kind of move on from things and to not be held responsible or accountable for what they've said or done. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword here that, the issue is the proliferation of deepfakes and using them effectively, but also the fact that they exist can be used to muddy waters of, for real video as well. So concerning in both ways, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's just like, I find it quite, I'm trying to think of a better word. I guess the word that I was thinking of was bonkers. I do find it quite bonkers that you can't really, it's difficult to figure out what reality is anymore and what people have said and done, because people have always lied about things, but now they have tools to sort of back up those lies with like quote unquote evidence, which is just crazy that this is like technology that has been developed. And I think deepfake technology has been developed and it's always been used for like at best mischief and at worst like flat out evil.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to my other question. I think it's a good time to segue there. We know, well, most of us, if we know what deepfakes are, we know that they are not used very morally most of the time. In most cases, illegally, actually, to put it bluntly. Lots of unconsensual pornography is created using deepfakes. And again, misinformation stuff like we're talking about. So not really ever in the clear. Even it's used in movies and TV, which I touch on in the article, to bring back dead actors or, to portray their characters, or, to de-age people so they can appear in something in a set period of time and they'll blend in or whatever. Like, even those uses are, yeah, they're definitely not like reprehensible like the others, but even that is like a bit of a gray area, and even that can be kind of morally concerning, right? Because is a dead person going to be able to tell you that yes, that they want to be featured in a movie by like artificial intelligence recreating them? Like, even that's dicey. So given that most of its, if not all of the uses of deepfakes have been questionable at best, do you think that, and whether this is necessarily possible or not, do you think they should be banned outright? Or, could they potentially be a force for good?
I don't think there's like any way that they can be like a force for good. Just in the way that like I can't see any like society helping functions of a deep fake. I can see like ways that they can be like kind of neutral. Like I think like the most innocent deepfake thing that I've seen, it was just this like trio of comedian dudes who released a video with Tom Holland. And then a couple weeks later, they were like, haha, gotcha. It wasn't Tom Holland. We went and made a deepfake with all of his interviews. So that's like the most innocent thing I've seen someone do with it. But even then, that's like very like that borders on mischief, and that borders on like, I guess even like it could be considered like, because you're making someone say something that they never said. That like there's no like real law for that yet. I don't think legislation has caught up with it, but that like falls into the like area of like that could potentially be slanderous or like libelous.
And
Obviously
it's still
those
just
would not be
non-consenting.
Yeah.
Which is
like,
it's just icky all about it. Even if they're not doing anything bad, it's just, I would be freaked out to see, you know what I mean? Like, I'd be freaked out to see video of me that I did not say, I was not there, had nothing to do with me, but someone just took whatever existed. Not that I'm have my face out there all that much that you could really create a believable deepfake, but you know what I mean, right? Like, it's freaky.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I think like the first time that I like really like consciously thought about it was when it was after Carrie Fisher had passed away and they wanted young Princess Leia in a Star Wars movie, and I guess rather than hiring an actress to play young Princess Leia, they made a sort of deep fake combining an actor, but also like Carrie Fisher's face. And like to me, I was like, that just feels like that's weird. Like, do you really need to do that? Can't you just get someone else to do that? Like that person, even if they had not very sadly passed, that person wouldn't be able to play young Princess Leia. So that was like, I don't know, it just feels very like I can't see any necessary uses for it or any like good uses for it. I think like even like the idea of like de-aging older actors in movies so they can play their younger self. It's like just get someone who like looks like they did when they were younger. I'm watching a movie. I don't need like this to be super accurate. You don't have to spend all this money and labor and resources to make Robert Downey Jr. look young in the new Avengers movie. So yeah, I can't really see any like good use for it, and all of the uses for it that are like popular, like porn and like misinformation. Those are bad, like societally reprehensibly evil, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mentioned the article. I'm like, that is or needs to be a universally shared opinion because there's no other side to that argument at all in terms of the really like blatantly illegal stuff. But it's funny because there's another Star Wars example, is the one that I wrote about or I included in my article. Recently, they de-aged Mark Hamill, who played Luke Skywalker, and he's still alive. And he actually was credited, even though it's not his, even though it's an AI generated voice and AI generated face of him, he was actually credited as starring in those episodes he was in of the Star Wars TV show, and he was consulted and was actually a part of like the process of that and was paid for his likeness being used. So that's an example where at least they're kind of checking all the boxes and it's done ethically, but it's still, like you said, at the best unnecessary. Like for years, movies and TV have just been getting younger actors who look enough like them and putting them in a hairpiece that basically gets them 90% of the way there and that they look like them. So I think if it was at all feasible, and I don't think it is, it's definitely not worth policing every corner of the internet. Like it's just impossible. I think it'd be better if they weren't around, deepfakes, personally. I think there would just be a net benefit from all those things, all the horrific things not being able to happen. But like, I don't think that's at all feasible. Really, the only thing you would stop is like the stuff in movies and TV, right? This stuff's already illegal, so making it illegaler is not really going to stop it. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess like the best way to deal with it is, I guess, just to kind of like let people know that they exist. And like, God, it's so just like question everything, even if it's a thing that you see with your eyes, and that's freaky. It kind of makes me want to like throw my computer out the window just a little bit. I don't love that. Even the like Mark Hamill thing where it's like he very much consensually agreed to this, was consulted on this. And I think even with the Carrie Fisher thing, like she had a thing where she was like, you can use like my image, like had agreed to that in theory at some point. Don't like quote me on that or anything. But I think that's what happened there. But even then, it's just like, do you really need to do this? Like, is this a technology that needs to exist? Is it one that like is productive or helpful? And I just don't think it is. So I think, yeah, it would be better if it just all went away, but obviously it's not going to go away. So I guess then the next best thing is just to know that it's out there and exists and that people can do it. And people are always going to want to learn how to do this kind of stuff.
I'll end it with this. The only thing I can think of is it might fade from movie and TV because it feels a little fad-ish. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's ever able to get to a point where it's not distracting, and it just kind of lifts you out of it. So I feel like it will kind of fall by the wayside. It's really only something that like multi-million billion-dollar movies are doing, like Star Wars. But yeah, that'll kind of be the best case for movie watching people, is that it will probably fade from there. But sadly, I think the illegal uses are only going to ramp up, which, I hope they can catch as many of them as possible, but I know that's just going to be, it's an impossible task to stop it.
So this week for my one opinion article, I actually only managed to write one. I had the week from hell in terms of things breaking and getting rescheduled. So I did write one article, but it was quite impassioned. I wrote about residence dons, and how they exist, not just at Brock, but at lots of universities. Some places they're RAs, some places they're even weirder names. But whatever they are, whatever the job title is called, I think it can be like a really exploitative system, and it can sort of exploit desperate university students, I guess, who are looking for affordable housing while they're in university. So some of the things I touched on in the article is that at most universities, dons are really only compensated with a room. They might receive minimal payment for training, but they don't receive like weekly paychecks for the work that they do. So yeah, that is what I wrote about, and that is what I want to talk about a little bit. So Noah, I guess I'm curious about what like your thoughts about dons and the whole residence system are, because like, correct me if I'm wrong, you never lived in residence.
First, I want to mention, wow, we have such a uplifting, positive topic choices this week that I picked. But you are correct. I did not stay in residence, so I have only really heard about dons from a few friends who did stay in residence and complained about them, and then in upper years, a couple friends who worked as dons and complained about that. So
lots and lots of complaints about the whole thing. I did stay in residence in my first year. I had, a pretty good experience. I'm glad that I decided to live in residence. Had a good experience with my don, but definitely just like that experience in first year, and also just like talking to other people who've done it. It seems like an insanely stressful environment, and it seems like you're sort of required to care about like 30 plus people and all of their personal issues and problems, which is, the people who become dons are usually like fairly caring, empathetic people who genuinely do want to help. But that's a lot to put on someone who's like, in most cases, 19 or 20 years old. So I guess, what do you think about like the kind of responsibility that's being placed on people? Do you think that like the way that they're compensated for that kind of work is enough, or do you think there is something wrong with the way that universities treat, I guess, student residence employees?
yeah, I mean, providing people their housing and sometimes food, I think, at least in Brock's case, I'm pretty sure that they get meal credit with it as well.
It depends. It depends on what level you are. Because at
Okay.
least when I was in first year, the dons still had to pay for their meal plan. If you were the head resident, you got your meal plan comped. But yeah, not all dons got meal plans. They might have gotten reduced price ones, but they did not get all of their food provided for free.
Okay. So even worse. But yeah, that's paying someone in housing is a bit overtly predatory. It's one thing to pay people low wages, but to tie it to where they're living, especially tie it to where they're living, where they're going to school. So like the need for them to maintain that job is greater than, the need for you to treat them well in that job or make sure that they're, uh, they're being heard and things are being done to make things better for them. That imbalance is very overt, right? And tying it to your housing just kind of is like the gut punch to that. Like that's very exploitative. I don't think that's a fair, economic agreement that's being entered into in that instance, right? You're really preying on people's needs, and that's never good. And especially what I've heard about, and even some of the stuff you mentioned in the article about, what they're expected to do and what that job looks like in practice is, makes that even worse. But even if the work was, more manageable, I think providing people their housing while they're at school from the university for doing a job for the university, like that arrangement is screwy. That's not right, I don't think. But that's just my thoughts. I don't know. I'm sure it's all, of course, it's all above the book and is allowed. I just personally don't think that that's proper. But
yeah, it's quite a sort of strange system. Also, everything that I mentioned in the article, all of the like stuff that they're expected to do and all of the payment, that was taken like directly from like residence application forms. So like this is like stuff that they're admitting to. It's not even like the stuff that like happens behind the scenes that they don't talk about. So that's one thing that's like, wow, okay, so like these are expectations that are fully communicated. But I guess it's just sort of a strange thing because like if you provide on-campus housing, I think, and it's tied to the university, just for first years, I do think like, and especially if you have rules and codes of conduct, I do think like it's important to have supervision, and having that supervision be like an upper year student, I can see where that's like probably one of the better ideas to have, because like it'd be weird to be living in university housing and like there's also like a 30-year-old living in the dorms with you. But I guess also no 30-year-old would agree to do that job. So it's a weird thing. I can see, where universities are coming from doing it with upper year students. I think what it came down to for me is like the hours that they work are quite intense. The breaks that they are given are kind of non-existent. Being a Don is kind of like you're expected to be on most of the time. They are encouraged to sort of take nights away and stuff. But I remember even, and this wasn't just my Don, it was a lot of Dons. They had this sort of like altruistic, like, if you need me, just text me and I'll be back kind of thing. So even when they were away, they were still sort of on call, which is, I think, problematic in and of itself because it's a job that you can't really turn off. You are always the Don. You're always the person that someone's going to come to. And it's a very difficult job. It can be a thankless job. A lot of students, hate their Dons because they have to be snitches. That's part of the job contract is you're kind of a snitch who's paid in housing. So it's a difficult, thankless job. And I think for the work that they do, they should definitely at the very least be getting a paycheck every week for that. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to propose.
yeah, it needs to be reformatted. Absolutely. Just not proper how it's being done. Even if they gave them the cash value for the, for the board would be preferable. But preferable to that would be more money so they can afford to live and, have money set aside, God forbid, or to even pay for school. But even just having multiple people, maybe, maybe we could have more than one upper year student responsible for like 20 plus people who are basically the same age as them. And even that, to me, is a little bit crazy. I don't know. It's not to. There's a balance to putting kind of stuff on individuals and their responsibility, and saying what is more like structural. And I get that at the end of the day, Brock is technically responsible for them. On their property, they paid them. essentially like rent, but not rent for to live in the residence. But like I'm thinking when I started university and just I was not in need. I mean, I was at home. I get that benefit too, but like just not in need of like another student a year older than me to figure out all this stuff for me and like do all these things. Like I get that there's extreme circumstances that come up and emergencies happen and they're away from home and I get it. I get that it's different. But it seems wild that like they're needed so frequently at random hours, like that they can't even go away without having someone text them and have to drive back from wherever they're from or whatever. Like it seems wild to me how much they're relied on, like they are literal children rather than just being a year or two younger than the person that they're going to for help. Like that to me seems a little crazy too. But I was not in residence, so that's the caveat there. I don't have that experience. Mine's biased from being at home. I get it, but that seems a little crazy too, from the student, like the students living in residence perspective.
Yeah, there are certainly, like I said, I was in residence in first year. There were certainly some incidents that I think warranted having someone there. And I guess like when I was reading the like expectations and like, you know, the responsibilities, a lot of them were just like know who to call in this situation, know when to do this in this situation, know when to handle something on your own. You know, Dons get a lot of training in like roommate mediation, which, you know, that makes sense to me. If you're having someone, you know, living away from home for the first time, maybe sharing a room for the first time, yeah, fair enough to have that person there. I think also just like the hours that Dons pull, it's impossible to have like a part-time job and be a Don. And you know, I read like responsibilities and like contracts from a couple different universities, so it's not just Brock. Um, Most Dons will receive like less than $2,000 in like cash at the beginning of the year as compensation for training, and then they can't really have another job during the year because being a Don is like, you know, it is kind of a full-time job. So I guess just asking people to live on $2,000 for an entire school year, that's a bit to me. What are you doing there? Like that. I
While
can't
they
imagine
are
doing that.
while they are also working for their board.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not right. That is so bizarre that that still is how things are done. Very unfair, but you know, they're as long as it can as long as it can keep going, right, then it's in the benefit of the university to just keep it that way. And that's kind of the issue with a well, is transient the right word or is that
I think like the turnover rate for Dons
yeah.
has got to be pretty high.
Well, even just for the time of your life that it like I don't see someone doing that more than 1 year, even if the job was great.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of how it would fit in. Like once you get into third and fourth year, like those commitments outweigh, you know what I mean? Like the time you could spend fixing everyone else's problems in residence. Like you got to get down, you got to hunker down a little bit. So I I don't ever see it being much more than like a 1 year job in most cases. So like that
Yeah,
benefits the
absolutely.
university too, right? That benefits them not making any improvements or not having to pay anyone more because I don't know this for a fact, but I would put money on it that the vast majority of them only last a single year, if that.
Yeah, I don't like obviously don't know that for sure, but the way that it definitely seemed in my first year was it was like someone lives in residence in their first year, they have a great time, they're having a good time, and someone says, "Hey, you're like a very upbeat person, you seem very empathetic and caring, you should be a Don next year." They're a Don for the next year, and then they move out of residence because being a Don is not a glamorous lifestyle from what I can tell. So yeah, I guess my hope is just that like residence employees ask for more and that these jobs, I don't know, it's hard though because like people need affordable housing, especially in university, and being a Don is the quickest way to get affordable housing, but I guess to me it just looks like it's not worth it, but you can't really realize that until you've done it for a year, and then by then there's another 18-year-old who's willing to do that job. So I guess it's just a very cyclical thing, and that's to the benefit of big institutions.
That does it for another episode of The Latest. Thank you, Holly, for joining me to talk about the many great articles we were able to talk about today. And thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. Remember that you can find the full articles we talked about here today and many, many more by going to our website, www.brockpress.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at The Brock Press. On top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, you name it. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you'll find us. Just look up The Brock Press podcast, The Latest, and you should find us with no issues. You can also find us on our YouTube channel, and it's also on the website. So no excuses. It's everywhere. Make sure you don't miss an episode. With all that said, thank you again, and we will see you next time for another episode of The Latest.